Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair, staring at the stars through the main screen of the UES Explorer. They had been traveling through space for 3 months now, checking different star systems for signs of life. So far, they had found nothing but empty planets and dead rocks floating in the darkness. "Captain, I'm getting something strange on the sensors," said Chief Science Officer Lisa Park from her station. Her voice carried excitement that Jake had not heard in weeks. "There's an energy reading coming from the 4th planet in this system. It's not natural." Jake leaned forward in his chair. After months of disappointment, any sign of something different was worth investigating. "What kind of energy reading?" Lisa worked at her controls, her fingers moving quickly over the buttons. "It's hard to say, sir. The readings are very weak, but they're definitely artificial. Someone or something made them." The bridge crew suddenly became more alert. Navigator Ben Clark checked his star charts while Communications Officer Pete Rogers adjusted his equipment to scan for any signals. Everyone knew what this could mean. In all of human history, they had never found another intelligent species. Earth was alone in the galaxy, or so they thought. "Take us closer to the planet," Jake ordered. "But keep our distance. We don't know what we're dealing with yet." The UES Explorer changed course, moving toward the 4th planet in the Kepler 442 system. As they got closer, the sensors began picking up more information. The planet was about the same size as Earth, with blue oceans and green continents. It looked like a world that could support life. "Captain, you need to see this," Lisa said, her voice filled with amazement. She put the sensor data on the main screen, and everyone on the bridge gasped. The planet was covered with cities. Huge stone structures stretched across the continents, connected by roads and waterways. There were farms and forests, harbors and bridges. It was clearly the work of an intelligent civilization, but something was wrong with the picture. "Where are all the lights?" asked Ben Clark. "Don't see any electrical signatures at all." Lisa studied her readings more carefully. "That's what's so strange. The cities are there, and they're clearly advanced, but there's no power grid, no electromagnetic radiation, no signs of any technology we would recognize." Jake frowned. How could a civilization build cities like these without advanced technology? The structures on the planet below were enormous, some of them larger than anything humans had ever built. Yet the sensors showed no signs of the machinery that would be needed to create such things. "Maybe their technology is different from ours," suggested Dr. Amy Collins, the ship's expert on ancient cultures. "They might use power sources we don't understand. Or maybe they don't use technology at all," Lisa replied. "But that doesn't make sense. How could they build cities like these without machines?" Jake made his decision. "We're going to make contact. Lisa, prepare a full sensor sweep of the planet. Pete, start broadcasting friendship signals on all frequencies. Amy, I want you to study everything we can learn about their culture before we meet them." Over the next few hours, the crew of the UES Explorer gathered as much information as they could about the mysterious planet below. The cities were indeed made of stone, but the stone had been shaped and fitted together with incredible skill. The roads were perfectly straight, the buildings were beautifully designed, and everything seemed to be built to last forever. "Captain, I'm getting a response to our signals," Pete announced. "It's coming from the largest city on the main continent. They're trying to communicate with us." The message that came through was unlike anything the humans had ever heard. It was part sound, part light, and part something else entirely. The ship's computers worked to translate it, and slowly, words began to form on the screen. "Welcome, travelers from the stars. We are the Xanathia of Haven 4. We greet you in peace and ask that you meet with us to share knowledge and friendship." Jake felt his heart racing. This was it. His first contact with an alien species. Everything humanity had dreamed of for centuries was finally happening. "Send a reply," he ordered. "Tell them we come in peace and would be honored to meet with them." Xanathia response came quickly. They invited the humans to land shuttles near their capital city, which they called Lumen Spire. They promised safe passage and offered to provide guides and translators for the meeting. Jake chose a small team for the first meeting. He would lead it himself, along with Lisa Park, Dr. Collins, and diplomat Karen White. They would take 2 shuttles and land outside the alien city, keeping their main ship in orbit as a precaution, as their shuttle descended through the planet's atmosphere. Jake got his first close look at the Xanathi civilization. The cities were even more impressive from up close. The buildings were made of different colored stones that seemed to glow with their own light. Gardens and parks were everywhere, filled with plants that looked like nothing on Earth. "Look at the size of those structures," Lisa said, pointing to a group of towers that reached high into the sky. "They must be 1,000 feet tall. But I still don't see any sign of the cranes or machinery they would have needed to build them." Shuttle landed in a clearing outside the city walls. Within minutes, they were surrounded by the Xanathi delegation. Jake stepped out of the shuttle and got his first look at the aliens who had built this incredible civilization. The Xanathi were tall and graceful, standing about 7 feet high. They had 6 limbs, 2 legs, and 4 arms, and their skin had a pale blue color that seemed to change slightly in the light. The most striking thing about them was the crystal formations that grew from their heads. These crystals pulsed with different colors, creating patterns of light that were clearly some form of communication. The leader of the Xanathi delegation stepped forward. His crystals pulsed with calm, steady light as he spoke in a voice that was surprisingly musical. "I am Elder Corvash of the Xanathi Council. Welcome to our world, beings from the stars. We have waited long for this day." Karen White, trained in diplomacy, stepped forward to respond. "We are honored to meet you, Elder Corvash. I am Karen White, representing humanity. We come seeking friendship and knowledge." Elder Corvash's crystals flashed with what seemed like pleasure. "Let us show you our city. There is much we wish to share with you, and much we hope to learn from you." As they walked toward the gates of Lumenspire, Jake marveled at everything he saw. The walls of the city were made of stone blocks that fit together so perfectly that no mortar was needed. The gates were huge wooden doors, decorated with carvings that told stories of the Xanathi's history inside the city. The humans were amazed by what they found. The streets were paved with smooth stone, and clean water flowed in channels along the sides. The buildings were works of art, each one unique and beautiful. Gardens grew on rooftops and balconies, filled with flowers and fruit trees. But the most amazing thing was that everything was alive. The buildings themselves seemed to be growing with roots and vines that helped hold the stones together. Gentle creatures that looked like a cross between horses and birds carried Xanathi citizens through the streets. Even the streetlights were living things, plants that glowed with soft light as darkness fell. "How do you do all this without machines?" Lisa asked Elder Corvash. As they walked through the city center, the Elder's crystals flickered with a pattern that the translator interpreted as sadness. "That is a long story, friend Lisa. Our people learned long ago that some kinds of knowledge are too dangerous to keep, and we chose a different path from the one your people have taken." Jake felt a chill at those words. There was something in the Elder's tone that suggested tragedy and loss. What had happened to make an entire civilization give up technology? As they toured the city, Jake began to understand that the Xanathi had not given up learning and progress. They had simply chosen to pursue different kinds of knowledge, had become masters of biology, chemistry, and natural forces. They could grow buildings, breed intelligent animals, and create materials that were stronger than steel, using only natural processes. But there was also something else, a sense of fear that lay beneath their peaceful civilization. The Xanathi were hiding from something, and Jake had a feeling that humanity's arrival might have put them all in terrible danger. Dr. Amy Collins spent the next 3 weeks living among the Xanathis, studying their culture and history. Every day brought new discoveries that amazed her. The aliens had books made from specially grown plant fibers that could last for thousands of years. Their libraries were filled with knowledge about biology, chemistry, and natural sciences that far exceeded human understanding. But Amy noticed something strange about their historical records. All the oldest books seemed to stop at the same point in time, about 3,000 years ago. Before that date, the record spoke of a very different Xanathi civilization. It described cities that floated in the sky, ships that could travel between stars, and machines that could think and learn like living beings. "Elder Corvash," Amy said one morning as they walked through the great library of Lumenspire, "been reading your historical records and I have some questions. The old Zenith's crystal formations dimmed slightly, and Amy had learned that. This meant he was troubled. "What questions do you have, Dr. Collins?" Amy pulled out her notes and showed them to the elder. "Your people once had very advanced technology. Ships that could travel faster than light, computers more powerful than anything we humans have built. But 3,000 years ago, all references to this technology suddenly disappear. What happened?" Elder Corvash was quiet for a long time. His crystals pulsed with colors that Amy's translator had never seen before, patterns that seemed to represent deep sadness and ancient fear. "That is a story we do not like to tell," he said finally. "Brings back memories of the darkest time in our history." "Please," Amy said gently. "If we're going to be friends and allies, we need to understand each other's past. My people believe that knowledge, even painful knowledge, should be shared." The elder looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. But this story must be told to all your people, not just you. Captain Morrison and your other leaders must hear this as well." That evening, the human delegation gathered in the council chamber of Limbenspire. Captain Jake Morrison, Science Officer Lisa Park, Navigator Ben Clark, Communications Officer Pete Rogers, and Military Advisor Commander Rick Hayes all sat in a circle with Elder Corvash and several other Xanathi leaders. Elder Corvash began to speak, his crystals pulsing with the rhythm of his words. The story he told was unlike anything the humans had ever heard. Long ago, our people reached for the stars, just as yours do now. We built great cities that touched the sky and ships that could cross the galaxy in the blink of an eye. No, we thought. We were the masters of the universe, that our technology could solve any problem and defeat any enemy. The elder paused, and his crystals turned a deep, dark blue. We were wrong. There are things in this galaxy that are older and more dangerous than any natural force. We call them the Devourers, though that is not their true name. Their true name cannot be spoken by living tongues. Commander Hayes leaned forward. As the military expert on the team, he was always interested in potential threats. "What exactly are these Devourers? They're not alive, not as we understand life, Elder?" Corvash replied. "They are machines, but not simple machines like the tools your people build. They are thinking machines, learning machines, growing machines. They travel from star to star, seeking out civilizations that have advanced technology." Lisa Park felt a chill run down her spine. "What do they do when they find these civilizations?" "They consume them," said another Xanathi elder, her crystals flashing with angry red light. "They take everything, the technology, the knowledge, the people themselves. They turn it all into parts for their own endless expansion." Elder Corvash continued the story. "The Devourers came to our worlds during the height of our golden age. We had colonies on 100 planets, trade routes that spanned half the galaxy, and technology that seemed like magic even to us. We thought we could fight them." "What happened when you tried?" Jake asked, though he was beginning to fear the answer. "At first, we won small battles. Our weapons were powerful, our defenses were strong. But every victory only made the Devourers stronger. They could absorb our technology, learn from our tactics, and turn our own weapons against us. Every ship we sent against them became part of their fleet. Every defense we built became part of their attack." The humans listened in growing horror as Elder Corvash described the war against the Devourers. It had lasted only 5 years, but in that time, the Xanathi had lost everything. Planet after planet fell to the mechanical invaders. Billions of Xanathi were captured and converted into biological components for devourer machines. "How did any of you survive?" Amy asked. "A group of our ancestors made the ultimate sacrifice," Elder Corvash said. "They realized that the Devourers were attracted to our technology. The electromagnetic signals from our machines, the quantum, patterns from our computers, the energy signatures from our power sources. All of these things called to the Devourers like a beacon in the night." Ben Clark was working furiously with his portable computer, running calculations. "So they abandoned their technology to hide from these machines." "More than that," Elder Corvash replied. "They destroyed it all. Every machine, every computer, every piece of advanced technology was dismantled and scattered. Then they fled to this remote world and began building a new civilization based on principles the Devourers would ignore. Commander Hayes was studying tactical reports on his data. Pad, you're saying these Devourers can only detect advanced technology? The Devourers seek out civilizations that use what they consider to be useful technology, another Xanathi elder explained. They ignore planets where the inhabitants use only simple tools and basic materials. To them, such places are not worth the effort of conquest. Lisa Park looked up from her own notes with an expression of growing alarm. Elder Corvash, how do the Devourers detect technological civilizations? What kind of signals do they look for? Any form of advanced energy use, especially electromagnetic radiation from communication systems and power grids. Quantum signatures? From advanced computers? The energy patterns from faster-than-light drives. The Elder's crystals suddenly flash with bright, urgent colors. Why do you ask this question, Lisa Park? The human delegation looked at each other with dawning horror. Their ship, the UES Explorer, had been broadcasting radio signals, running quantum computers, and using its faster-than-light communication system to stay in contact with Earth. For 3 weeks, they had been sending exactly the kind of signals that would attract the Devourers. Commander Hayes stood up quickly. We need to contact our ship immediately. If these Devourers are still out there, we may have already given away our position. Pete Rogers was already working with his communication equipment. I'm trying to reach the Explorer, but I'm not getting a response. That's strange. They should be monitoring this frequency constantly. Jake felt his stomach turn cold. Keep trying. Use emergency protocols if you have to. Elder Corvash and the other Xanathi were watching the humans with expressions of growing concern. Captain Morrison, you must tell us the truth. What kind of technology does your ship possess? Jake realized there was no point in hiding anything now. Our ship has fusion reactors, quantum computers, faster-than-light communication systems, and a hyperdrive that can cross interstellar distances in days instead of years. The silence that followed was deafening. Xanathi elders looked at each other with expressions of absolute terror. Elder Corvish's crystals had turned completely white, a color Amy had never seen before. How long has your ship been in this system? Elder Corvash asked, in a voice barely above a whisper. Weeks, Jake replied. And how long has it been broadcasting these technological signatures? The entire time? Elder Corvash closed his eyes and his crystals went dark. When he opened them again, they glowed with the light of absolute despair. Then it is too late. He said, if the Devourers still patrol this region of the galaxy, they will have detected your signals by now. They will come, and when they do, they will destroy both our civilizations. The chamber erupted in urgent conversation as Xanathi leaders began talking rapidly in their own language, their crystals flashing with patterns too fast for the human translators to follow. Some seemed to be arguing, others appeared to be making plans, and a few were clearly in a state of panic. How long do we have? Commander Hayes asked, his military training taking over. The Devourers travel faster than anything we ever built, Elder Corvash replied. If they are coming, they could arrive within days or weeks. Amy felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. Her scientific curiosity about Xanathi's history had led to the discovery of a threat that could destroy both species. There anything we can do? Is any way to fight them or hide from them? Elder Corvash looked at her with an expression that mixed pity with admiration. Dr. Collins, your people have the same courage that once led my ancestors to challenge the Devourers. But courage alone was not enough then, and it will not be enough now. Pete Rogers suddenly looked up from his communication equipment with excitement. I'm getting a signal from the Explorer. They're responding to our emergency broadcast. Message that came through filled everyone in the chamber with dread. The emergency meeting in the council chamber of Lumenspire continued through the night. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the center of the room, surrounded by worried Xanathi elders and his own concerned crew members. The air was thick with tension. As everyone tried to understand what they were facing, how much time do we have before they arrive? Jake asked Commander Rick Hayes, who was studying the sensor data from the UES Explorer. Rick looked up from his datapad with a grim expression. Based on the energy signatures we're detecting, the Devourer fleet is moving faster than anything in our databases. At their current speed, they'll reach this system in less than 72 hours. A young Xanathi named Veltar, who had been quietly listening to the discussion, suddenly stepped forward. His crystals were flashing with rapid, angry patterns. "This is the humans' fault," he declared. "For 3,000 years, we have lived in peace and safety. Now these strangers come with their machines and bring death to our world." Several other young Xanathi began nodding in agreement, their crystals pulsing with similar angry colors. Elder Corvash raised one of his forearms to calm them, but Veltar continued speaking. "We should send the humans away immediately. Maybe if we destroy their ship and all traces of their technology, the Devourers will pass by our world as they have for so many years." A more radical Xanathi leader named Purifier Sectar stood up from his seat at the back of the chamber. He was older than Veltar, but younger than Elder Corvash, and his crystals burned with a fierce white light that made even the other Xanathi uncomfortable. "Veltar speaks the truth, but he does not go far enough," Sectar declared. "The humans have doomed us all with their reckless use of forbidden technology. We cannot simply send them away. The damage is already done. It's the only way to preserve. Our people is to make sure the Devourers find no trace of advanced technology when they arrive." Jake felt a chill as he realized what Sectar was suggesting. "You're talking about destroying our ship and killing my crew. If that is what it takes to save 200 million Xanathi lives, then yes," Sectar replied coldly. "You're 400. Lives are a small price to pay." The chamber erupted in argument as different Xanathi factions began debating among themselves. Some supported Sectar's extreme position. Others called for a more moderate approach. And a few brave voices suggested that both species should work together to find a solution. Elder Corvash's crystals blazed with authority as he called for silence. "Enough. We will not solve this crisis by fighting among ourselves. Purifier Sectar, your proposal is not only morally wrong, it is also strategically foolish." "How can you say that?" Sectar demanded. "Because the Devourers are already coming," Elder Corvash explained. "Destroying the human ship now will not change that fact. The electromagnetic signals have already been broadcast across space. The quantum signatures have already been detected. Even if we eliminated every trace of human technology from this world, the Devourers would still arrive to investigate the signals they detected." Dr. Amy Collins had been studying her notes about Devourer behavior during the argument. Now she looked up with a thoughtful expression. "Elder Corvash, in your historical records, did the Devourers ever leave a world once they arrived to investigate technological signatures?" The old Xanathi's crystals dimmed with sadness. "Never. Once they arrive at a world, they consume everything they find useful and destroy everything else. Even if they find no advanced technology, they will strip the planet of its resources and enslave its population." Lisa Park had been working with her portable computer, analyzing the approaching energy signatures. "Captain, I'm getting more detailed readings from the Explorer. The Devourer fleet consists of at least 50 ships, each one larger than a human city. The flagship appears to be over 10 miles long. The numbers were staggering. The UES Explorer was a large ship by human standards, but it would be like a small boat facing an entire navy. Even with their most advanced weapons and shields, they had no chance of winning a direct fight against such overwhelming force. "What about evacuation?" suggested Navigator Ben Clark. "Our ship can't fight them, but maybe we can get some people out of here before they arrive." Elder Corvash shook his head sadly. "The Explorer can carry perhaps a few thousand individuals at most. We have over 200 million Xanathi on this world. There's nowhere to run that the Devourers cannot follow." Jake made a decision that surprised everyone in the chamber. "Then we don't run. We stay and fight." The room fell silent. Even his own crew members stared at him in shock. Commander Hayes was the first to speak. "Captain, with all due respect, that's suicide. We can't possibly win against odds like these." "Maybe not with conventional tactics," Jake replied. "But the Devourers have one weakness that we might be able to exploit. Amy looked up from her historical research with sudden understanding. You're thinking about their programming limitations? They ignore primitive technology because their systems are designed to absorb and counter advanced threats. Exactly, Jake said. Lisa, what would happen if we deliberately downgraded our weapons and systems to levels that the Devourers would consider primitive? Lisa frowned as she considered the idea. It might work in theory, but Captain, we're talking about giving up our most effective weapons and defenses. Primitive weapons wouldn't do much damage to ships that size. They would if the Devourers. Defenses weren't programmed to stop them, Jake pointed out. Amy, did your research reveal anything about primitive weapons being used against the Devourers during the original war? Amy flipped through her notes quickly. There are some references to late war experiments with chemical weapons and kinetic projectiles. The reports say these weapons had limited effectiveness, but they weren't completely useless. Elder Corvash's crystals suddenly began pulsing with a pattern that the human translators interpreted as excitement mixed with hope. Wait, there is something in our oldest records, something I had forgotten until now. The old Xanathi walked to one of the ancient archive cases and carefully removed a book that looked even older than the others. Its pages were made from some kind of metallic material that had survived thousands of years without decay. This is the personal journal of War Commander Dekfar, one of the last Xanathi military leaders to fight the Devourers. Elder Corvash explained. In his final entries, he describes experiments with what he called Stone Age weapons, simple tools and weapons, that worked on basic chemical and mechanical principles. What did he discover? Jake asked eagerly. Elder Corvash read from the ancient text, his crystals providing light to illuminate the faded words. He says here that the Devourers' absorption systems could not process simple chemical explosives or basic metal projectiles. Their point defense systems were programmed to counter energy weapons and guided missiles. But they ignored things like gunpowder and steel bullets. Commander Hayes leaned forward with professional interest. Did these primitive weapons actually damage the Devourer ships, according to that? Yes, the damage was limited, but it was real. The problem was that by the time this discovery was made, the Xanathi military no longer had access to the resources needed to produce primitive weapons in sufficient quantities. Jake felt the first stirring of real hope since the crisis began. But we do have those resources. The Explorer has manufacturing facilities that can produce basic chemical explosives, simple firearms, and metal projectiles. You're talking about deliberately making our weapons less advanced? Lisa said uncertainly. That goes against every principle of military technology development. Sometimes the old ways are better than the new ways, said a new voice from the back of the chamber. Everyone turned to see a female Xanathi, who had not spoken before. She was younger than Elder Corvash, but older than Veltar, and her crystals pulsed with steady, confident light. I am Nexkla, she said, introducing herself to the humans. I am what you might call a warrior philosopher. I study the arts of combat and defense, but I also study the wisdom of choosing the right tools for each situation. What do you mean? Jake asked. The Devourers are like a giant who can catch arrows and turn swords aside, but who has never learned to dodge a simple stone thrown by a child, Nexla explained. Sometimes the most advanced solution is not the best solution. Elder Corvash's crystals were now pulsing with the brightest light anyone had seen from him. Nexla speaks wisdom. Perhaps there is a way to fight these ancient enemies after all. We only have 3 days, Commander Hayes pointed out. Can we really design, manufacture, and deploy primitive weapons in such a short time? We won't be working alone, Jake said, looking around at the Xanathi leaders. Elder Corvash, would your people be willing to help us prepare for this battle? As the old Xanathi looked at Purifier Sektar and the other faction leaders, then back at Jake, Captain Morrison, 3,000 years ago, my ancestors faced this same choice. They chose to run and hide rather than stand and fight. Perhaps it is time for the Xanathi to make a different choice. Sektar stood up angrily. You would risk the lives of every Xanathi on this world for these strangers. I would risk our lives for the chance to finally defeat the enemy that has haunted us for 3 millennia, Elder Corvash replied firmly. The next morning, The largest workshop in Lummenspire was transformed into a weapons factory unlike anything either species had ever seen. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the center of the chaos, watching as humans and Xanathi work side by side to build tools of war that their ancestors might have recognized. Chief Engineer Sam Parker had arrived from the UES Explorer, along with a team of technicians and several portable manufacturing units. The machines hummed quietly as they produced materials that would have seemed impossibly primitive just days earlier. "How's the gunpowder production coming along?" Jake asked Sam as he checked on the various workstations around the large room. Sam wiped sweat from his forehead and grinned. "The Xanathi know chemistry better than most human scientists. They've been helping us create explosive compounds that are more stable and powerful than anything we could make on our own." At a nearby table, Dr. Amy Collins was working with a young Xanathi named Veltar to design simple firearms. Veltar had overcome his initial anger about the human presence and was now one of their most enthusiastic helpers. "The key is to make everything as basic as possible," Amy explained to a group of Xanathi craftsmen. "No electronic components, no advanced materials, no computer guidance systems. Just metal tubes, chemical propellants, and simple mechanical triggers." Veltar held up a rough prototype of what looked like a large musket. "Will weapons this simple really be effective against the Devourers?" "They will, if the Devourers' defenses ignore them," Amy replied. "Remember, these machines are programmed to counter advanced threats. Expect energy weapons, guided missiles, and sophisticated armor. They're not prepared for a steel ball fired by gunpowder." Across the workshop, military specialist Kate Brooks was training a group of Xanathi volunteers in basic combat tactics. The aliens were quick learners, and their superior physical coordination made them excellent marksmen once they understood the principles involved. "The key to fighting with primitive weapons is getting close," Kate explained as she demonstrated how to load and fire a simple rifle. "These guns are not accurate at long range, but they don't need to be if we can board the Devourer ships." "Want?" Female Xanathi warrior named Kexfer raised one of her forearms. "How do we get close enough to board their ships? Our people have no experience with space combat." Kate smiled grimly. "That's where human tactics come in. We're going to use the Explorer as bait to draw them into close range. Then we'll launch boarding parties using simple rocket sleds that their sensors should ignore." The rocket sleds were Sam Parker's proudest creation. Built using basic chemical rockets and simple metal frames, they could carry a small team of fighters from the Explorer to a Devourer ship without triggering the enemy's advanced detection systems. The rockets use solid fuel and mechanical timers. Sam explained to Elder Corvash, who was inspecting one of the finished sleds. "No electronics, no guidance computers, no quantum signatures. To a Devourer scanner, these will look like flying chunks of metal." Elder Corvash's crystals pulsed with what the humans had learned to recognize as admiration. "Your people are very clever, Engineer Parker. You have taken our need to avoid advanced technology and turned it into a tactical advantage." Meanwhile, Navigator Ben Clark was working with Xanathi scientists to develop special chemical compounds that could damage Devourer hull materials. The aliens' knowledge of organic chemistry was proving invaluable for creating acids and corrosive substances that could eat through metal. "This compound should dissolve most known metals within minutes," explained a Xanathi chemist, whose name the humans couldn't pronounce. "We grow the ingredients in our gardens, so the Devourers will never suspect them of being weapons." Ben tested a small sample on a piece of metal from the Explorer's hull. The metal began to smoke and bubble as the chemical ate through it like acid through paper. "That's perfect. You can put this in simple glass containers and use them like grenades." Dr. Collins made another important discovery while studying the ancient Xanathi records. She found references to biological weapons that had been used in the final days of the war against the Devourers. The Xanathi ancestors created engineered bacteria that could attack the organic components in Devourer machines, she told Jake excitedly. The Devourers use captured biological material as part of their computing systems. If we could introduce the right kind of bacteria into their ships, could the modern Xanathi recreate these biological weapons? Jake asked. "I believe so. Elder Corvash says they still have samples of the original bacteria in their biological archives." It would take time to grow enough to be useful, but we might have just enough time if we start immediately. The workshop buzzed with activity as both species worked together with desperate energy. Humans shared their knowledge of metallurgy and mechanical engineering, while Xanathi contributed their expertise in chemistry and biology. The result was an arsenal of weapons that looked primitive but incorporated the best knowledge of both civilizations. As the second day of preparation began, Communications Officer Pete Rogers brought disturbing news from the Explorer's long-range sensors. The Devourer fleet has increased speed, he reported to the assembled leaders. They'll arrive 6 hours ahead of our original estimate. We have less than 30 hours to finish our preparations. The news sent a wave of urgency through the workshop. Work crews began operating around the clock, with Xanathi and humans taking turns to rest, while others continued the vital task of weapon production. Warrior philosopher Nexgla had been working with Kate Brooks to develop boarding tactics that would take advantage of both species' strengths. Xanathi fighters are faster and more agile than humans, she explained. We should lead the boarding parties, with humans providing covering fire and technical support. Agreed, Kate replied. But remember, once we're on their ships, we'll be fighting in an environment designed for machines, not living beings. Stay close to your human partners and watch out for automated defenses. Elder Corvash approached Jake as the captain inspected a rack of newly completed rifles. Captain Morrison, there is something else we must discuss. The great prohibition that has governed our society for 3,000 years will need to be officially suspended for this battle. Jake nodded, understanding. That's a big decision for your people. Are you sure the council will agree? They already have, Elder Corvash replied, his crystals pulsing with determined light. By a vote of 8-3, with Purifier Sektar and his closest supporters dissenting, we have authorized the temporary use of these defensive primitive weapons for the duration of the crisis. What happens after the battle? Jake asked. Assuming we survive, will your people go back to the old ways? Elder Corvash was quiet for a moment, watching as his people worked alongside the humans to create tools of war. I think this experience will change us forever, Captain. We have learned that hiding from our problems does not make them disappear. Perhaps it is time for the Xanathi to find a middle path between our ancestors' reckless embrace of technology and our own fearful rejection of it. As the final day of preparation began, the workshop had produced an impressive arsenal. Hundreds of simple firearms, thousands of chemical explosive devices, dozens of rocket sleds, and containers full of biological and chemical weapons filled the large room. Commander Rick Hayes conducted a final inventory with Sam Parker. Do you think we have enough firepower to make a difference against 50 ships? Sam looked around at the primitive weapons they had created and shrugged. Honestly, Commander, I have no idea. We're about to fight the most advanced enemy in the galaxy using weapons that would have been outdated 1,000 years ago. This is either the stupidest plan in military history, or it's so crazy it might actually work. Let's hope it's the second option, Rick replied grimly. As night fell on Haven 4, both species made their final preparations for the battle that would determine their survival. The Use Explorer moved into position at the edge of the system, ready to serve as bait for the approaching Devourer fleet. On the planet below, volunteer fighters from both species boarded shuttles that would take them to the main ship. Jake stood on the bridge of the Explorer, looking out at the stars and thinking about the incredible journey that had brought them. To this point, 3 weeks ago, they had been explorers seeking new knowledge and friendship among the stars. Now they were warriors preparing to fight an enemy older than human civilization. Captain, long-range sensors are detecting the first Devourer ships at the edge of the system, Lisa Park reported from her station. They'll be in weapons range within 4 hours. Jake nodded and activated the ship's communication system. Hans, this is the captain. In a few hours, we're going to face an enemy that has never been defeated in 3,000 years. They have superior numbers, superior technology, and superior firepower. But they have never faced the combined determination of humans and Xanathi fighting together with weapons they cannot understand or counter. He paused, looking around at the bridge crew who had become like family to him over the months of their mission. We're not just fighting for our own lives today. fighting for the right of all intelligent species to choose their own path among the stars. The Devourer fleet emerged from the darkness of space like a nightmare made real. Captain Jake Morrison watched from the bridge of the UES Explorer as 50 massive ships took positions around Haven 4. Each Devourer vessel was a twisted combination of metal and organic material, constantly shifting and changing as it absorbed and processed. New technology. The flagship was the largest artificial structure Jake had ever seen. It stretched for miles across space, covered with weapons that had been stolen from 1,000 different civilizations. Strange lights pulsed along its hull as scanning beams reached out to examine the human ship. "They're trying to analyze our technology," reported Science Officer Lisa Park from her station, "but they're ignoring the primitive weapons we loaded into the cargo bays. Our sensors classify gunpowder and steel as non-threatening materials." "Perfect," Jake replied. "That gives us the element of surprise. How long before they move into boarding range?" "At their current approach speed, about 20 minutes, answered Navigator Ben Clark. "They're being cautious, probably trying to understand why we haven't run away or surrendered." The plan was simple but dangerous. The Explorer would allow itself to be boarded by Devourer forces, pretending to surrender while secretly deploying boarding parties armed with primitive weapons. The key was to get close enough to the enemy ships to cause real damage before they realized what was happening. In the shuttle bays, teams of human and Xanathi fighters made final preparations. Military specialist Kate Brooks checked her simple rifle one last time while standing next to Nextcla, the Xanathi warrior philosopher who would lead the alien fighters. "Remember, once we're inside their ships, stick to the plan," Kate told her mixed team of humans and Xanathi. "Plant the chemical charges near anything that looks important, then get out fast. These ships are huge, so we can't waste time exploring." Nextla's crystals pulsed with confident light. "My people are ready, Kate Brooks. We have waited 3,000 years for the chance to strike back at these ancient enemies." On the planet below, Elder Corvash stood in the great plaza of Lumenspire, surrounded by thousands of Xanathi civilians. They watched the battle in the sky through telescopes and listened to radio reports from the human ship. For the first time in their recorded history, the Xanathi were not hiding from the Devourers. "Whether we win or lose today," Elder Corvash said to his aide Veltar, "our people will never be the same. We have remembered what it means to fight for our freedom." In space, the first Devourer boarding craft approached the Explorer. The alien machines looked like mechanical spiders the size of buildings, each one capable of cutting through the human ship's hull and disgorging hundreds of Devourer warriors. "Here they come," announced Communications Officer Pete Rogers. "Lead boarding craft will make contact in 60 seconds. Jake activated the ship's internal communication system. "All teams, prepare for boarding action. Remember, let them think we're helpless until our people are in position on their ships." The first Devourer boarding craft attached itself to the Explorer's hull with a grinding, tearing sound that echoed through the entire ship. Mechanical cutting tools began slicing through the outer armor, preparing to create an entry point for the invading forces. But while the Devourers focused on boarding the human ship, they completely ignored the small rocket sleds that launched. From the Explorer's lower shuttle bays, the sleds used simple chemical rockets and carried teams of fighters, armed with primitive weapons that didn't register on Devourer sensors. Chief Engineer Sam Parker watched from the engine room as his rocket sleds carried the first wave of boarders toward the nearest Devourer ship. "Good luck, people," he whispered. "You're about to find out if 3,000 years of Devourer superiority can be defeated by gunpowder and determination." The first boarding team reached the hull of a Devourer cruiser without being detected. The ship's automated defenses were programmed to stop energy weapons and guided missiles, but they completely ignored the simple explosive charges that the human and Xanathi fighters attached to the hull. "Charges set," reported Team Leader Commander Rick Hayes over the radio. "Beginning hull breach in 3, 2, 1. The explosion tore a hole in the Devourer ship's armor, but the ship's repair systems didn't respond because they were programmed to ignore damage from primitive chemical explosives. Rick led his team through the breach and into the alien vessel's interior. Inside the Devourer's ship, The boarding party found themselves in a nightmare landscape of twisted metal and pulsing organic material. The walls seemed to be alive, covered with veins that carried glowing fluid throughout the ship. Strange mechanical creatures scuttled along the corridors, maintaining and repairing the vessel's systems. "It's like being inside a giant machine that's also somehow alive," whispered Dr. Amy Collins, who had insisted on joining the boarding party to study Devourer technology firsthand. The team moved quickly through the ship's corridors, following the plans they had memorized from Elder Korvash's historical records. Their destination was the ship's central processing core, where the Devourer's main computer systems were located. They encountered their first Devourer warriors near the ship's center. The mechanical beings were over 8 feet tall, with multiple arms ending in weapons that had been absorbed from conquered civilizations. They moved with perfect coordination, communicating through electronic signals that traveled faster than thought. But when the Devourers tried to defend themselves, they discovered that their weapons couldn't stop simple steel bullets fired by gunpowder. Their energy shields were designed to deflect laser beams and particle weapons, not chunks of metal moving at high velocity. "It's working," shouted Kate Brooks as she fired her rifle at a Devourer warrior. The steel bullet punched through the machine's armor and damaged its internal systems. Their defenses can't handle primitive weapons. The battle spread throughout the Devourer ship as more boarding teams arrived from other rocket sleds. Xanathi fighters proved to be especially effective in the cramped corridors, using their superior agility to outmaneuver the mechanical warriors, while human fighters provided covering fire with their simple guns. Nexkla led a team of Xanathi warriors deeper into the ship, carrying containers of the biological weapons that Dr. Collins had helped create. When they reached the ship's organic processing centers, poured the engineered bacteria into the flowing veins that carried nutrients throughout the vessel, the effect was almost immediate. The living parts of the ship began to convulse and die as the bacteria attacked the organic components that the Devourers used for computation and control. Warning lights flashed throughout the vessel as its biological systems failed one by one. Meanwhile, other teams planted chemical charges throughout the ship's vital systems. The Devourer repair mechanisms ignored the simple explosives because they were classified as non-threatening, allowing the boarding parties to place their weapons without interference. Back on the Explorer, Jake watched as similar battles raged on dozens of Devourer ships throughout the fleet. The alien vessels were beginning to show signs of serious damage as primitive weapons tore through defenses that had been designed to counter far more sophisticated threats. But the Devourers were beginning to adapt. Their learning algorithms were analyzing the damage patterns and trying to understand why their defenses were failing. Some of the ships began targeting the rocket sleds and boarding teams, finally recognizing them as threats despite their primitive technology. "Captain, the Devourer flagship is changing course," reported Lisa Park. "It's heading directly for us, and it's charging what looks like a planet killer weapon." Jake realized that the enemy commander had decided to end the battle by destroying the human ship and everything around it. "All boarding teams, you have 5 minutes to complete your missions and get out. The flagship is about to open fire." On the Devourer cruiser, Riquez and his team reached the ship's central core just as the 5-minute warning came through. The core was a massive chamber filled with processing units that combined mechanical computers with living brain tissue. From conquered species, "Set the charges around the organic components," Rick ordered. Those bacteria should spread through their entire network. As his team planted their weapons, Rick noticed something strange about the core's design. The Devourer system seemed to be connected to every other ship in the fleet through some kind of quantum communication network. If they could disrupt this network— "Amy, can you upload that logical paradox you and Elder Korvash developed?" Rick asked Dr. Collins. Amy worked quickly at a simple computer terminal they had brought with them. "If I can get this into their communication system, it should spread to every ship in the fleet. But I need more time." "You've got 2 minutes," Rick replied, watching as Devourer warriors began breaking through the sealed doors around the chamber. Amy's fingers flew over the keyboard as she uploaded the paradox that she and Elder Korvash had created. It was a simple logical problem that would confuse any computer trying to classify technology as either primitive or advanced. If it worked, the Devourer fleet would become paralyzed as their systems tried to process contradictory information. Upload. Complete! Amy shouted just as the first Devourer warriors broke into the chamber.